Hey, what's up guys, my name is Fox and welcome to another video of mine. In this video I will be comparing the two current supports of Lost Ark, the BARD and the Paladin, for PvE. This has been one of my most requested videos for a while, so here it finally is. This video serves the purpose of showing you the differences that both supports bring to the table. I will go over their shields, buffs and heals while comparing both to each other. Lastly, I will give a personal input of my opinion and how much gear or engravings both need to really excel. Before we start, I'm using the Russian translated names for the skills, so if you're playing on the EUNA version, the skill names will be different, but the icons are the same. So let's start. First up, the shields. Let's have a look at what kind of shields both classes provide. Before we do this, I have to mention that on the latest Korean patch, Rufion's Word has received a significant buff that puts a shield on all of your party members that enter the AoE it provides. With that buff, both supports now offer the same and equal amount of shields on a similar cooldown. Let's talk long cooldown shields. For the BARD, this is the Indomitable Performance. When you cast Indomitable Performance, you increase the defense of your party, and if you choose the correct tripod, apply a shield to them as well at the end. For the Paladin, this is the Shield of Faith. It applies immediately and shields your party on demand. Next up are the lower cooldown shields. For BARD, this is Wind of Music, and for Paladin, this is Rufion's Word or God's Law. Both of the abilities are on a lower cooldown and both shield your party. The BARD has to position themselves in the party to shield the members around her, while the Paladin can just cast his AoE from a distance. Your party has to actively stand in that AoE that either provide to receive the shields. And lastly, the last shielding both can provide is from their ultimates. As you can see, in terms of shielding, both of these classes are very similar to each other and both provide the same amount. Now let's talk about buffing your party's damage. First up is the constant debuff you need to provide. Both classes can apply and should apply a debuff that increases damage taken of the target by 10%. Fortunately, both of them also can apply it consistently, resulting in a straight up 10% damage increase for your party when you play with a support no matter whom you choose. BARD uses Sound Shock or the Harp to apply the debuff, while Paladin can use Unbearable Radiance to also have full uptime on that 10%. So as you can see, debuff wise, they are absolutely equal. Now let's talk about buffs. Before we do this, please note that the buffs that are not tied to your identity gauge all provide the same amount of damage for both jobs. They have 6% base damage and that 15% attack power of the support on top of that. So if both supports are the same item level, have the same gear, the buffs are equal to each other. Let's start with BARD's Heavenly Performance, which just buffs simply everyone around you for 8 seconds. Next buff the BARD has is the Sound Shock Vibration, which though is a bit harder to use. The buff is the same amount, but there is one problem. It is an AoE that you put on the ground. Please note the buff is not stackable with Heavenly Performance, you need to spread them out. Your party members have though to actively stand in this buff in order to actually receive it. This can be hard at times because a lot of people have their animations disabled to avoid screen clutter. But in Korea, a recent patch has changed it so that you can only enable positive party member effects so that you can see these kind of buffs, which is really good. Still, any ranged or non-positional job should be hovering around the back anyway, which is where you should be putting this AoE. Sadly, gun lancers and destroyers will mostly miss out on this buff since they sit in front of the boss. And lastly, we have the identity gauge buff the BARD provides, which is the Serenade of Valor. This is either a 5, 10 or 15% damage buff depending on the amount of gauge you have used. Now this buff is AoE wide and is also stackable with any of the other two buffs, which makes it an excellent tool to buff your party during the boss's downtime. The more gauges you use, the longer the buff will last too. It's either 8, 12 or 16 seconds. And that pretty much is all the buffing the BARD can do. So now let's talk about Paladin. So the Paladin has pretty similar buffs. First, we have the Guardian Angel buff, which is simply an 8-second AoE buff for everyone in your party and has the same damage as the BARD buffs. The second buff, coming from Hand of Heaven, is exactly the same. Both of the buffs affect party members around you in a certain radius when you cast the skills, so they're very simple and straightforward. Lastly, we have also one additional buff that you can stack, which is the buff from your Healing Faith. The Healing Faith is mostly used for healing, but is also a 10% additional damage buff, which is a huge area around you that you can see and people have to actively stand in it. So as you can see, buff-wise, the two supports are very similar to each other with a few minor differences. Those differences are that BARD can buff more with its identity gauge when using it, but also has to rely on the other buff, which is a targetable AoE, instead of just having everyone around him being buffed. This can cause problems, as mentioned before, from time to time if the party members are not standing inside of it. Paladin, on the other hand, is just a walking buff machine, and with that we've covered all buffs both have. Before talking about healing, I want to remind you to please leave a like if you're enjoying the video so far and also consider subscribing to my channel. But now, let's talk about heals. BARD has one heal in their kit, which is the Aura of Healing. This aura can only be activated once you have at least one bar of your identity gauge, and then will create a puddle in which your party members need to stand and receive a bursty heal. The higher you gauge, the longer and more you will heal. Very simple and straightforward. For the Paladin, it's a little bit different. You do have two heals in your kits. One of them is the Shield of Faith and heals everyone for 8% of their maximum health once the shield has expired or has been destroyed. The other heal the Paladin has requires him to have his class engraving. Depending on the class engraving level, it can heal up to 2% of their max health per 1.5 seconds, but it can also be less. This heal is just like the buff, an AoE around the Paladin that people have to stand in to receive that heal. And with that, the comparison is done. Now I'm going to talk about personal opinion and how much gear both classes need to really excel. I highly suggest sticking around for this info or this segment because it is really important. So just so you know, I am playing both the BARD and the Paladin. I have Paladin as my main and BARD as an alt because I needed one, and I also wanted to know how BARD really performs and excels in raids. Now there's a few things that I want to talk about specifically for Paladin, because Paladin needs a lot to actually really excel. Without the class engraving, Paladin has only one very small long cooldown heal, which can be an issue in certain parties. So Paladin does really need that engraving, but on top of that, he also really needs the Awakening engraving to generate gauge to get access to this heal. Now on top of that, the Paladin heal is really low if you do not run the Specialist engraving. So arguably, for Paladin to really excel at healing, I'm not talking about shielding or buffing here, we're talking about healing. For healing on Paladin to excel, he needs 3 full engravings, and that is my issue with Paladin a little bit. Now of course Paladin has their upsides, like the whole buffs that he has are just simply AoEs, they're not targetable or anything like that. Every buff he uses is just for everyone that is in the 24 meter radius, which is like really big, so you don't have to worry about people missing your buff. But yeah, Paladin will be worse in early game content. As long as you're not able to get a lot of engravings, Paladin will definitely be worse than BARD, that's not even a question. Because the BARD doesn't need the engraving to actually heal people. The BARD has the heal in his kit, which just simply is easier. You don't need to get your urgent rescue engraving necessarily. You can play without it. Sure, it is absolutely better to have it, but it's just an additional heal. So yeah, in my opinion, Paladin is, once you get those 3 engravings, the better healer. Why is that so? Well, because you can heal everyone. Your healing is for everyone that is in the 24 meter radius with your Shield of Faith, and it also is just the AoE around you that is very large. While the BARD's heal really needs to be targeted in a certain area. It is very bursty, which is really nice, don't get me wrong. The BARD's heal is super bursty, and if your party is really low, you can save someone by having that burst heal ready. Paladin is unable to do that. But Paladin, on the other hand, is more of a consistent provider of heals and buffs than the Bard, in my opinion. I mean, you should probably make your own opinion on what you saw. I hope you can understand my points for Bard and for Paladin. Now, of course, a lot of you are going to ask, what is more liked in groups? And honestly, there is no difference. Both of them can carry their groups in their own way. Both of them have really high amounts of heals if they have the right engravings. Both of them have really good buffs. And I have so far never preferred playing with a Bard or with a Paladin. Maybe some people have a preference due to, I don't know, the Bard's heal being more bursty and you don't need to stick around for a while the healing faith from the Paladin, you need to actively stand in it to receive the heal. But the heals are pretty equal if everyone grabs all of it. Now, one thing I totally forgot to mention, even when I already had finalized the video, so this is now at the end of it, is that Bard actually has to choose in between using their heal or their buff. Their identity gauge can only do one of the two. So if a party is actually really strong and really good, you can buff them more because they don't need your heal. Yet if a party is not so good and they need to be healed more, you can choose to use your heal more. Now this obviously means that Bard can only do one of the two. They cannot buff and heal from their identity gauge at the same time, like the Paladin can. On top of that, obviously, this requires you to make on-the-spot decisions. Do you heal them or do you buff them? So Bard has a bit more decision making in its kit than the Paladin by default, because Paladin will just buff and heal at the same time, while the Bard again has to choose. And with that, we're at the end of the video finally. I hope I was able to provide you with enough information of what the differences in between Bard and Paladin are. This was really important to me because of people always ask, what is the better support? And honestly, I don't think either is better. I think both are equally good and both have their advantages, both have their disadvantages. And honestly, I want to see a third support in Lost Ark. Don't get me wrong, I like Bard, I like Paladin, but I want to see another one that probably has the same stuff. It will have again 2 buffs that you cannot stack, 1 identity gauge buff. It will have all these things again, but I just want to see another support to, I don't know, have it more open. Maybe female Paladin or male Bard. Who knows, that would be interesting. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching the video. If you did enjoy it, make sure to hit that like button. Leave me a subscribe, that would also be amazing. And if you want to, you can also, if you do use Twitter, go follow me on Twitter. I always post there when I stream or when I release a new video, of course. And with that, I'm wishing you a great rest of your day, wherever you live.